What is up guys, Rick Hack is here with an amazing video to show you today. Now the Battlefield 1 trailer recently came out and blew everyone away, myself included. I am a huge Battlefield fan, and actually when Battlefield 4 was new, that was basically all I uploaded to my channel. Now we all know that Battlefield 1 is set during World War I, and although most fans have appreciated this change in setting, there are some concerns. Mainly people are worried about gun diversity. I mean, wasn't everyone using bolt-action rifles in World War I? How fun is that gonna be? Well, that's absolutely not the case in Battlefield 1 and not the case in real life. There is a ton of different weapons that did see service, even light service, in World War I that you definitely didn't expect, including assault rifles. Yes, assault rifles in World War I. So today we're going to be showcasing those crazy weapons that are likely to make it into Battlefield 1. Now these weapons weren't found by analyzing the trailer, but rather found by analyzing history and doing research on the weapons utilized in World War I. A ton of work went into this video, and I think this is just such an awesome video for Battlefield 1 fans. I would really appreciate it if you slapped that like button. Now with that out of the way, let's get started on these weapons. Now we're not going to go over bolt-action rifles because again, that's what everyone expects in World War I. Just remember that there was more than one bolt-action rifle utilized. There was dozens of bolt-action rifles utilized by many different factions in World War I, so there's a ton of diversity just with those. Now we're going to start out right here with the Mondragon rifle. This is a Mexican semi-automatic rifle that was actually the first semi-automatic rifle put into service. Now actually this weapon was sold to various different factions, but most notably adopted by the Germans for World War I, and they often used this weapon. It wasn't actually the most reliable, so they used this weapon with their Air Force and actually gave it to pilots. So this weapon, again, not that reliable. If you get a bunch of mud and dirt in it, it's going to jam, it's going to cause problems, but if you give it to your pilots in the air, very clean, not much dirt, and if they have to parachute out or if they have to make a crash landing, they're going to have a very effective semi-automatic rifle that again isn't really going to be that dirty. You're going to see that a lot in today's video. A lot of these weapons have very limited service, but again, they were actually utilized in World War I. If you went to a battle, you may indeed see one of these guns being utilized. However, most soldiers are still using those bolt-action rifles, but it doesn't mean that they won't make it into Battlefield 1, and in fact, Battlefield often ignores the standard issue weapons argument and basically says, hey, if this saw service, you can utilize it in a Battlefield game. That's been kind of what Battlefield has done for their past few games. Now before we move on, the cool thing about this rifle was that the Air Force that I was mentioning actually utilized it with a 30-round drum magazine, so I hope that makes its way into Battlefield 1. Now very quickly, another semi-automatic rifle that was in use in World War I was the Winchester Model 1907. This had 5 to 10 round box magazines and was utilized by several different factions in World War I, including the United States, Russia, Great Britain, and France, which actually turned it into a fully automatic version, which we're going to talk about later in the video. Now there were definitely more semi-automatic rifles utilized in World War I, but we're going to leave those alone now and move on to submachine guns. Yes, there were submachine guns utilized in World War I. The first one we're going to look at is one that you've probably already recognized, the MP18. Now this is actually utilized on the guy in the promotional poster for Battlefield 1. He has an MP18 strapped to his side. So this is already confirmed to be in Battlefield 1. The MP18 was utilized in 1918, which was the last year of World War I. It ended November 1918 by the Germans and is considered the first really practical submachine gun introduced into combat. This weapon shot at around 500 rounds per minute and is often pictured with its 32-round drum magazine. However, it could also use around a 20-round box magazine. Now again, we know the MP18 is going to be in Battlefield 1, but what are some more submachine guns likely to be in the game? Well, the main other submachine gun likely to be in Battlefield 1 is the Beretta Model 1918. This Italian submachine gun actually predated the MP18 and was the first submachine gun actually utilized and issued in service with the Italian armed forces, and actually is possibly the first SMG used as a general issue combat weapon. This weapon features a top-loaded 25-round detachable box magazine, actually is chambered in 22 long rifle, which is a very small caliber, but kind of makes up for it with a 900 rounds per minute rate of fire, which is actually pretty insane, especially for such an early submachine gun. Yet another submachine gun likely to be in Battlefield 1 is the Ribriol 1918. This is a French submachine gun utilized by the French army in World War I, so it did see service, very likely to be in the game, but the very impressive and very interesting part about this weapon is that some people call it a submachine gun, but other people refer to it as a carbine. This actually utilized arguably the first ever purpose-built intermediate cartridge, which was kind of a little bigger for what most SMGs utilize. So again, this is actually somewhat considered a carbine in some sense. Now this weapon features a rate of fire of 550 to 600 rounds per minute. It actually has an effective range out to 400 meters, which is pretty good for an SMG, and again, that's why it's kind of considered carbine-like, and has a 25 round box magazine. And this weapon was actually derived from the Winchester 1907 that we talked about earlier. Now we've looked at some SMGs, we've looked at even technically a carbine, so let's move on now to the assault rifles. And again, not joking, the first one we're going over is the Fedorov Automatic Rifle. Now I don't think you can say that in any way except for with a Russian accent. Now this Russian weapon is considered by many to be the first real assault rifle, and although it is kind of a really early assault rifle, very similar to just a normal rifle, it was still capable of fully automatic fire, reaching around 350 and 400 rounds per minute, and it featured a 25 round detachable box magazine. Now the best part of this rifle is it wasn't purely a prototype. This saw service, it saw combat with the Russian army during World War I, and as a result, very likely to actually make it into Battlefield 1. So excited to actually use an assault rifle in Battlefield 1. That should be absolutely awesome. Now moving on, another proto-assault rifle is the Sei Righiotti. Now this Italian rifle, unlike the last weapon, this didn't really see service. There's no evidence that says that this saw service. It doesn't mean that it couldn't, and it actually does exist during World War I. In fact, it was first designed in 1900. So this weapon was around during World War I, however there isn't direct evidence putting it in any specific battles. Now this weapon was actually very interesting. It was actually a single or burst fire weapon, so it could fire in bursts of 3. However, apparently there was a demonstration with this weapon where it fired 300 rounds fully automatic before eventually getting so hot it seized up and kind of couldn't be utilized anymore, but we'll just kind of skip over that. And also, it was shooting those rounds fully automatic at a rate of fire up to 900 rounds per minute. And there apparently were prototypes of this weapon that featured up to a 50 round magazine. So a 50 round, 900 rounds per minute, technically assault rifle in World War I, yes, it technically did exist. So very interesting if DICE decides to put this in Battlefield 1. Now the next assault rifle we're going over is the Farquhar Hill Rifle. Now this weapon is an amazing British rifle, 700 rounds per minute with a 20 to 65 round drum magazine. And the best part is that this actually did see service with the British Royal Flying Corps in World War I, so that means it's very likely to make it into Battlefield 1. This thing looks amazing. I definitely want this with a 65 round magazine. Can't wait to use this weapon. Next, we're moving on to light machine guns, and we're starting out here with the Lewis gun. This is very important because, as you can see here from this screenshot of the trailer, the Lewis gun is capable to utilize as an infantry weapon, just walking around, utilizing it, from the hip. You can aim down sights with it in Battlefield 1. That's very important because there was a lot of different light machine guns utilized, like the Lewis gun, in World War I. Now, most of the time, these weapons were utilized with a bipod from an entrenched or an emplaced position and not really carried around and utilized, from the shoulder. However, as we've already seen from that screenshot, Battlefield 1 does let you do that, and it is possible in real life to shoulder these weapons. They're very heavy, they're kind of cumbersome, and they might be annoying, but it is possible to do that with this Lewis gun, which is why we're talking about it, and all of the other weapons that haven't yet been confirmed. Now, the next light machine gun we're going over is something that you're all probably recognize, but not from World War I. It is the M1918 Browning Automatic Rifle, or the BAR, and you've probably used this in many different World War II games. And yes, this was a prominent gun in World War II. However, this actually technically did enter into service, saw combat with the Americans in World War I in the last 3 months of the war. Now, although it wasn't a major player, again, it entered at the very last part of World War I, it did technically still see service, and therefore it is likely to show up in Battlefield 1. Now, next we're going over this crazy looking light machine gun, which is the Chouchat, and this is a French light machine gun that saw extensive use in World War I. Now, this crazy looking gun had a very slow rate of fire, around 240 rounds per minute with a 20 round magazine. Now, this weapon, although it was again often utilized with a bipod from an emplaced position, it was still quite often picked up, utilized from the hip, and often shouldered. And in fact, it was done so much with this weapon that this weapon kind of created the walking fire tactic, which is basically what it says: walking forward with this weapon, advancing with this weapon while using it fully automatic to suppress the enemy and advancing with a group of riflemen behind you. The next light machine gun we're going over is the Danish Madsen machine gun. This light machine gun saw extensive use for the entirety of World War I and actually was utilized in the Russo-Japanese War predating World War I, so it's very likely to be in Battlefield 1. Now, the specs for this weapon feature a 450 rounds per minute rate of fire and a 25, 30, or 40 round top-loaded detachable box magazine. Next, we have the German Bergmann MG15NA light machine gun. This weapon was Germany's first light machine gun in World War I, saw extensive service, so very likely to be in Battlefield 1. It featured a rate of fire of 500 rounds per minute and was belt-fed with 250, 200, or 100 round belt lengths. Now, the last light machine gun we're going over is the Hotchkiss M1909. This weapon did see a decent amount of service in World War I from the Australians, New Zealanders, among other nations. Now, this weapon featured a 400 to 600 rounds per minute rate of fire and actually had a 30 round strip magazine, which is what you saw in the picture, or can also be belt fed. Now, moving on, when people think of shotguns in World War I, they often think of the pump-action trench gun. Well, the last weapon we're going to look at is an alternative to that, the Browning Auto 5, a semi-automatic 5-round shotgun utilized in World War I. It's pretty amazing that they had semi-automatic shotguns all the way back to World War I, but this weapon did indeed see combat during that war. I can't wait to fight people with a semi-automatic shotgun in Battlefield 1. Now, that's going to be it for the weapons we're covering today. Again, a ton of work and research went into this video, and it's such an awesome video for Battlefield fans. I'd really appreciate if you guys simply rate or share that video. It really helps me out. But again, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it informative. Now, if you want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter. That's linked in the description down below, as is my Twitch channel, which you can also follow. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.